Hey, welcome into the Hot Read Podcast for Friday, March the 8th. I'm your host, Easton Freeze, Director of Published Content here at BroadwaySportsMedia.com. We're also brought to you by the 440 Podcast Network. You can follow us on social media at Easton Freeze. I'm joined as always by producer JT, who you can follow on social media at JT_Ruhnke. JT, how are you?
I'm good. Happy Thursday. If you're listening to this on the day after, happy Friday. Getting ready to get into some free agency. A week from now, we'll probably see a couple of new players donning the two-tone blue. So excited to jump in and speculate about who that might be.
Absolutely. I am not home, obviously. I'm here at Sea Island, Georgia. I can't decide how I want to wear my headphones here on my laptop. Having a good time, a little spring break action. So JT holding down the fort for us in Nashville. And if you hadn't heard from earlier this week on our Tuesday show, the Tuesday show next week, the early week show next week is going to be the producer JT show. They're going to talk about, I don't know what they're going to talk about. Whatever they feel like they want to talk about. JT and whoever he decides to have on the show should be a good one. So tune into that one because I'll be traveling that day. And then after this show and next show, free agency is officially upon us. Things will actually be happening for us to react to and players to discuss that are on the market. Some guys will start coming off the board. So exciting times here in the NFL. We're looking forward to getting into not just former Titans, current Titans that are set to hit free agency here in just a couple of days, whether or not the Titans should hang on to those guys, but also some players around the league as the Titans have $75-ish million worth of cap space to spend wherever they see fit. A number of key names around the league hitting the free agency market. The Tennessee Titans could absolutely be in the market for really any of them at any of the positions because they need a lot of everything. And so we're going to dive into some key names there and discuss what we think this team should do. There are many different paths they could take, and so we're going to try to cover as many of those bases as possible. If you want to join us in today's live chat, you can do so by going over to Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page. That's Broadway Sports Media on YouTube, finding this live stream, and in the comment section of that video is when you can be a part of the conversation today, like Derek, D. Good, William, Alex Titan already are. Alex saying, I need a Titans free agency rumor. Like I need oxygen right now. My friend, I'm sure that they are coming within the next 72 to 96 hours, I'd imagine. Derek saying, I have a bad feeling the Titans aren't going to sign anyone, or at least anyone worthwhile. Well, if they sign no one, I don't know who's playing football next year because this roster has like 17 guys on it right now. So they got to sign somebody. But Derek, I'm sure I'm going to assume you mean anybody of note, and you're going to be left feeling underwhelmed by free agency. I'd imagine they get at least one big boy name, and we're going to discuss who we think that might be today, amongst some other things. One last thing before we dive into today's conversation. If you can be so kind as to hit the subscribe button on YouTube. We are trying to get our subscriber count up and up and up. We are almost to our goal of 1,000. We've built this website, this site on YouTube, this channel, really from like no followers as we started doing YouTube this past year. And so we're trying to hit that first 1,000, a very difficult milestone, but an important one. And so if you can help us do that in any way, we would appreciate you doing that. It's very helpful. Hitting that subscribe button, easy for you, helpful for us. JT, where do we want to begin today? We can start on the Titans side of the ball, guys that they should retain or should absolutely let walk. We can start with some guys that may be coming in and be new Titans. Let me start us off with just some general dates to give some folks an idea of when the festivities are actually going to begin. So next Monday, the 13th at noon Eastern time, 11 Central, is when the legal tampering window is open. That is when teams can legally get away with what they're already kind of doing behind closed doors, talking to free agents, talking to agents of free agents, trying to figure out who they want to target, when, where, and why for their team once the actual free agency begins. The legal tampering opens on the 11th, ends on the 13th, which is that following Wednesday, this upcoming Wednesday, little less than a week from today. That at 4 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday is when we will be having free agency officially begin. Signings can come down legally, and they will come hot and heavy on the back half of next week and into the weekend with some of these big boy names coming off of the board. That being said, before we dive into individual guys and the merits of them, do we want to talk a little bit about philosophy, JT? Because you and I had a special guest on the show 2-3 weeks ago now, Randy Mueller, former NFL GM working with The Athletic now, and we talked with him a good bit about the importance of knowing the difference between big game hunting and free agency and shopping in the bargain bin, right? Not being afraid of overpaying when you should and shouldn't be afraid of it, and just being wary in general of winning free agency. Typically not a good recipe. What do you want to see from a big picture standpoint from the Titans this offseason in terms of the way that they approach their needs?
Well, if you're going to go big game hunting, you need to do it at a position of need, and that has to come at either the secondary position.
You care to be more specific? Or, that's like all the positions.
Exactly, right? But the ones that truly matter. I don't think you can go out there and sign a big time running back or a big time.
Right.
There are a couple of receivers out there who I think you could give money to, but I don't think you should be spending 20% of your free agency money this offseason on the receiver position, because I just don't think it's that good. But if you look at the safety position, if you look at the linebacker position, you look at basically the entire defensive side of the ball, there are some guys out there who I would definitely be okay with signing to bigger time deals, giving them more money. But it's really going to come down to is how does this team navigate like Randy said, getting through the bargain bin and getting younger and cheaper in a hurry, because like you said, they do still need just players to field the team. And that can't always come with just paying every player top dollar to kind of build your team. You have to find some of the value. And I think that's what Rand Carthen and company are going to try to do.
A fantastic observation from Randy that kind of gives you a 10,000-foot perspective on this group of free agents is that the talent is mostly on the defensive side of the ball, the value mostly on the offensive side of the ball. And that certainly rings true, that we didn't quite know what it would look like with no tags, no cuts yet when we spoke to him a couple weeks ago. But today I was looking up and down the board as we get more of an actual list of these are the guys that are really going to be available for your team to sign. And I think that's still the case. A lot of the talent is on the defensive side of the ball, but you might find the most prudent, maybe frugal is the wrong word, but like thrifty options on the offensive side of the ball. And so another thing that Randy said was, they have $75 million worth of cash to spend. He said he would be surprised and went as far as to say he would be disappointed if they spent much more than about half of that. And the more I think about it, the more I think that might be the best way to go. Now, don't get me wrong. If they have a big game guy or two that they are really zeroed in on as a guy that can be the next guy for them in a certain role, or he really fits the identity of their team, and they think he's going to be a foundational linchpin of their team, and they're willing to take that risk, don't be afraid to sign a big contract or two. But in general, I think it's going to be more about the quantity than the quality with these guys on a Titans team that, if we're being honest, not looking to be top end of competitive next year. They're not pushing all their chips into the table by any means. They are in rebuilding year one and trying to, I think their ultimate goal, figure out whether or not Will Levis is their guy for the future. And so that's something that I think we have to keep in mind. And that being said, I want to ask you along those lines, like what positions, based on what we know about the draft, based on what we know about this free agency group, I have a couple of positions in mind that I'm thinking, yeah, they really need to get this to a place where they're comfortable with it before April 23rd or whenever the draft begins. I forget the actual date. Like by mid-April, they need to be in a good place with this position and not need to come away from the draft with anybody because of X, Y, or Z. Are there any positions that stand out to you in that way with this free agent group?
Yeah, I think it's the safety position because there's just too much good talent for them not to go out and get some, whether it be some of the top end guys or even bringing in maybe Kevin Byard on a reunion team friendly deal. Once again, just to build up that depth. I think especially in the secondary kind of both the cornerback and safety positions, they need to feel like they are pretty set and are, if the time and the opportunity arises where they can go best player available, maybe at that 38th pick, and they want to add a true number one corner to go with the rest of the veteran depth that they've built through the free agency class, I think that's the one that sticks out to me the most, that they need to have set in stone before the NFL draft. I think one other one that I would throw in there is the wide receiver position, and not just because of the need there, but you have to understand exactly what you're going to do and how which wide receiver you draft and how they're going to fit within that mold, because you have DeAndre Hopkins, you have
Right.
Treylon Burks, and you have Kyle Phillips, along with a couple of other wide receiver 4s and 5s on the roster. And I think that when you go into free agency here, what they do in free agency with the wide receiver position will be really telling to see where they're really thinking in the first 2 rounds about wide receiver.
Okay, so you took this in both of the directions I wanted it to go. So that's some fantastic podcasting on your part. Let me back up real quick before we get to what you were getting at there. Them alluding to or giving us clues as to what they want to do in the draft based on free agency. Let me back up one step and say I agree with you that safety and just the secondary in general is where I would be primarily focused with free agency. For me, in particular, the positions are inside linebacker and safety. And for both of them, partially that reason is, man, the talent in this class, this draft class, just really is not there. And there is some really, I wouldn't say phenomenal, but there's a really good group of solid, NFL starting caliber players available, not just one or two guys, but who are relatively young for as free agents goes at both of those positions, absolutely in free agency. And so, the other reason is, yes, you can with some of they have 3 7th-round picks. They've got a 4th, a 5th, and a 6th. They could go get a depth guy at those positions, but we talked about the safety class, this linebacker class, maybe not being the worst in the world. Like, people are maybe underselling it a little bit, but they're pretty raw. Like, there's really not any of these guys at either of those positions in the draft where you're thinking we're going to be comfortable letting this guy be a day one starter, be a day one impact player. That's you're setting them up for failure in that way, right? That's just not something you're going to do with any of these guys, and you've got experience at those other positions. Just pulling up the list, because the safety position wasn't a crazy strength of the free agency class like 10 seconds ago, but then a million of them got cut in the last 3 days, and so now the list looks really, really impressive. I'm trying to, so here we go. Here's the safety free agent market. This is not even the whole thing. This is just the highlights, right? You got Xavier McKinney, Kyle Duggar, Justin Simmons, newly added today from Denver, Cameron Curl, Eddie Jackson, Kevin Byard, Julian Blackmon, Geno Stone, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Quandre Diggs, Jamal Adams, Darnell Savage, Jeremy Chin, Rayshawn Jenkins, Jordan Whitehead, Tracy Walker, Jordan Fuller. That's a lot of guys that and at the safety position, like, the average fan doesn't know a ton of safeties in general. The fact that the average fan can go down that list and be like, I recognize at least half of these guys, it's because there's a lot of really talented players in this group. And so I would imagine from that list I just read you, at least one of those guys is a future Titan, not just because they need competent day one starting talent in 2024 at the safety position, but they really could, with their rebuild, I think, benefit from having a Kevin Byard style experienced veteran presence in that room, because the safety position, you want it to be that quarterback of the defense. You want them to be the most intelligent defender on the field for a couple of different reasons. It certainly helps when they understand the game better than their teammates, or as good as any of their teammates. And so I think adding one of these guys could be really, really beneficial. Before we talk about individual guys, I'll mention the other thing you said about, the wide receiver position or the tackle position. How they address those two things, I think, are really going to inform us on their philosophy going into this draft when we get to mid to late April and the cards are on the table for the Titans in free agency. We have an idea of what they desperately need to come away with in terms of valuable day one starting talent in this draft. So namely their first and second pick. If they go spend on a couple of, 2 of the 4 or 5 top wide receiver free agents, I think that's going to, if I told you, a month and a half from now, JT, the Titans have signed Calvin Ridley and they have signed, like a Darnell Mooney or a Curtis Samuel to the team. How confident are you that one of those first 2 picks is still a wide receiver? I think that changes the math entirely.
I think it changes the math too. And I mean, we could even take it a step further. I think that free agency is going to be a big linchpin in all of this, because they could go out and get, a Calvin Ridley and a Darnell Mooney, and then they could go take that kind of home run swing on a guy like Mekhi Becton or something. And so now you
Right.
have a tackle, you have 2 wide receivers, and then all of a sudden you start to think maybe trade back, or that's when you start to think once again that Brock Bowers might make his way to Tennessee.
He just sneaks his way back in there. Yep. And then we have to talk about it again.
Which is why this is such a big deal. And while I don't think it happens right away, right, I think we get to next Wednesday afternoon, and I think that patience is going to be the key. I don't foresee them just going out and doing kind of like what the Jaguars did a couple of years ago and just sign away. I think they're going to try to play the market as smart as they can. I wouldn't be surprised if they don't sign a guy until about maybe midday Thursday, maybe Friday. Maybe they take their time a little bit and just kind of see how the market is playing itself out before they start jumping on the value that they want, which might make fans a little bit, they may make them impatient.
You just know that's how it's going to go, right? Because it's too perfect. The Titans, we have like 6 months we've been talking about, like, look at that cap space. Holy cow, they can sign anybody, and they'll just sit on their hands for 24, 36, 48 hours, make everybody go crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
So I keep putting this off before we dive into individual guys. I've got a couple of these big, full breadth conversation topics I want us to get through first. And then I see a lot of you guys in the comments with your thoughts on certain guys. Keep them coming. If you are in the comment section over on Broadway Sports Media's YouTube page, let us know who you need to see on this team or who you will be furious if you do see on this team. This was an interesting tabletop conversation topic brought up by our buddy Mike Herndon on Twitter the other day. If you're the drunk guy at an auction and you're just like, there's a thing that you were eyeing, you may not necessarily need it. It may be ill-advised to spend as much money as you're prepared to spend on it as you know, as the value that it currently sits at. But dadgummit, you need this in your life, and you're willing to just do the irresponsible thing and do what it takes to get it. Who's that guy for you, or maybe guys, plural, in this free agency class? Who's the guy that you're the drunk guy? You're sitting there with, you got a bottle of wine in one hand and your little number in the other, and you just keep flashing that bad boy, regardless of the price. You need him on your squad.
And it's already been said in here, and I think I agree with Stoney, getting Christian Wilkins in the in the room to be on the line. You could literally throw out probably a 5. You could throw one of us out on the edge there, a 5'8" white skinny dude, and it probably wouldn't matter, because if you have Jeffrey Simmons and Christian Wilkins in the middle there, there's so much attention that would have to be put to those two guys in the middle there that I don't think it matters who comes off the edge. Of course, I think that's a very ill-advised a kind of option there, because you kind of want you want, well, because it works for some teams, because you want to pair Christian Wilkins with a guy on the edge who already is that dominating threat, like a Detroit Lions or a Cleveland Browns, right? If you have a Myles Garrett or an Aiden Hutchinson, being able to spend money on Christian Wilkins like that makes your defense so much better versus maybe just throwing both of them inside in the defensive line there. That still kind of makes you a one-trick pony there by rushing from the inside, right? You still need that outside pressure that I think some people still have questions that Arden Key and Harold Landry, can they get it done? I'm not so sure. Another one that I have been playing around with in my mind, as Chef Rand brings up, Danielle Hunter. He says he likes him over Wilkins. I think that's also an interesting idea if you were to actually spend big money on a pass rusher, because you really don't need to. But if you were going to, Danielle Hunter from Minnesota, I think, is probably the best and the option that makes the most sense for the Titans to bring in there to pair with all the guys on the front 7. So those are two guys that I think, if you were going to just throw the money down on the table and go get the best player, those two are my choices.
And those two exemplify this idea that, again, the talent is really on the defensive side of the ball in this free agency. I couldn't agree more with you on Christian Wilkins. Man, the things that I would do to see that guy line up next to Jeff Simmons, just, give me that. I don't care what the number is. I really do not. If they were to make a, just on paper, genuinely like, wow, great player, but that was financially irresponsible, there's just no way around it move this offseason, if Christian Wilkins was the guy we were talking about, I'd say, man, that was financially irresponsible, and I don't care at all. I love it. It's delicious. Danielle Hunter is absolutely in that conversation for me as well, although I'd imagine, I don't know, I get the impression that Danielle Hunter may have an even bigger market than a Christian Wilkins might, just because that edge rush position in general is more sought after, it feels like, and even more in high demand due to supply. That was my answer, was Christian Wilkins. I would do whatever for him. Let's transition to a guy that I know you're not necessarily banging the table for him in that way, but I think you're high on this guy potentially becoming a Titan. I'm different. I wouldn't say I'm not high, but I feel differently. So I'm going to let you explain the case for him first, and then I'll give my reservations. Patrick Queen played with Denard Wilson last year in Baltimore. He's a free agent, the number one inside linebacker option in free agency. I've heard you a couple of times say that you would really like him in two-tone blue for a couple of reasons. What are those reasons?
Well, first of all, the knocks, I think, on him and why some people are a little more down on him than some others. Obviously, it's the way that he kind of took his developmental track, right? He was a first round pick, I think almost 3-4 years ago, and really didn't see good production until last year. But I think that bringing him in and pairing him with Denard Wilson, I think Denard Wilson was able to bring a lot out of Patrick Queen this past year, and finally getting kind of that field general that you're talking about that you need from an inside linebacker. He could be a cornerstone piece to put with Jeffrey Simmons and give the Titans maybe that leadership quality that they lost with Kevin Byard, and kind of bring a new kind of identity and synergy to the team. He also is just a playmaker. I understand that that's not the best trait to have. You want a guy who's consistent across the board, but if you have guys on your team like Harold Landry and Jeffrey Simmons and other guys like that, and Arden Key, and you have a guy like Patrick Queen who you may be paying the same amount as some of those guys, Patrick Queen's going to be the one who, while he may mess up sometimes and you may be shaking your head at some points during games, that's going to all change when he forces that fumble, or he gets that interception, or he makes a big time play, because that's what he's done in the last year for Denard Wilson in that Ravens team. And he kind of was a big impact player on their way to the AFC Championship game for them. So I think he's going to command a lot of money this offseason, and at that position, which isn't super premium, I think it's a hard pill to swallow. But like you said, if you saw, it's the same way for me. If I saw him get paid by the Titans, I'd be like, okay, I can live with that, you know?
So I was trying to find his projected contract with Wilkins. By the way, the PFF projection is 4 years at a $25 million APY. It's like $100 million contract. They're projecting $67.5 million guaranteed. So it would be like it would be a second Jeffrey Simmons contract essentially on your books, which that's why I am preparing myself mentally and emotionally for when it doesn't happen, just because I don't think that's where they're going to really blow their entire load in that way. For Patrick Queen, the projection on PFF is, I'll find it in a minute. Here's my general thought on him. If you are getting the guy that we saw the last year and a half in Baltimore, for sure. Okay, here we go. So the projected contract, 4-year, 18 and change $million APY. So like a $72 million 4-year contract, $50 million in guarantees. So if you saw that number flash across your screen, Titans offer Patrick Queen $50 million guaranteed, $72.5 million full unguaranteed deal. Is that an overpay that you're just okay with? Because that number would rattle me for an inside linebacker. It really would.
If you look at it for an inside linebacker, I see why that would rattle you. For a player that is going to be the cornerstone of a defense where this is a long-term rebuild, and it's going to take maybe 2-3 years to get back to where you truly want to be, having that guy on your team come 2 to 3 years, if he continues on the projection that he is, I think that is a different way to look at it. And that's kind of the way I'm looking at it.
And that's, I'm with you there essentially in what you're looking for. The reason why I'll say it's not that I'm not high on Patrick Queen. It's that I am skeptical of Patrick Queen for this reason. Like you said, if you get the guy that is, who is currently on the trajectory that he's on the last year and a half in Baltimore, then that guy is to me worth $72 million, $50 million guaranteed. He really is. What I'm concerned about is, for the first 2.5 years of his rookie contract in Baltimore, he was playing every game, and he looked bad in every game. Like, he really was not living up to the hype at all, was not meeting the expectations that were set for him based on his draft stock and based on what he was in college. And then the Ravens went out and they got Roquan Smith from the Bears. They plugged him in, gave him an even bigger contract than the one that they're projecting for Patrick Queen this year. And Roquan, overnight, seemingly turned Patrick Queen into a different player. Like, I'm not saying Patrick Queen is a Roquan Smith merchant, but I am saying I'm worried about it a little bit. Maybe that's just, listen, if it's a result of, Patrick Queen was influenced by the addition of Roquan Smith because he was able to see the game differently in the meeting rooms. He had a different mentality in the locker room and on the field. Then, like, if what Roquan does so well rubbed off on Patrick Queen and he brings that to wherever he's headed, cool, I'm in. What I'm worried about is that Patrick Queen needed it was a puzzle piece. Patrick Queen was made what he was because of the presence of Roquan Smith. Their abilities complemented each other so well that it exemplified the positive things that Patrick Queen does really, really well, the things that make him a high-end prospect, and it completely covered up the deficiencies in his game. That's what I'm worried about. And if that's what the case was, and he even goes back to somewhere in between what he's been the past year and a half and what he was the previous 2.5 years, I think you've made a mistake giving him that contract. And so that's the gamble. I think it's going to take somebody who is really confident in their relationships with the coaching staff up in Baltimore. I mean, listen, if nobody else, Denard Wilson, the Titans' new DC, should have an idea of what the situation with Patrick Queen was. He should have some idea along those lines because he did work with him some. But I don't know. And I also, to kind of pivot our conversation, I kind of think that it's not going to matter because I think Patrick Queen and Geno Stone are both going to be Seattle Seahawks. I think you look at the Seahawks and what they've done so far in free agency. They have now cut or released their top 3 snap getters at the inside linebacker position and their top 2 safety snap getters at the safety position. Their new head coach is Mike Macdonald, the guy that these two guys thrived directly under. I don't see why, if I'm in their shoes, unless I'm getting $10 million a year more somewhere else, I'm going to Seattle to have my abilities maximized.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way to put it because then you're, once again, at least for Patrick Queen, I think that it makes a lot of sense, especially for Patrick Queen to go to a place that has had so much success at that position. You talk about guys like Bobby Wagner having played up there, just kind of the history that they have in Seattle, bringing a guy in like Macdonald to have Patrick Queen follow him makes a lot of sense. Geno Stone, on the other hand, I think I'd push back on that because Geno Stone had
and
been.
I'd love to be wrong. I want Geno Stone on this team. I'm very high on him, but I'm afraid he won't be.
I think Geno Stone had a lot of his success due to Denard Wilson this past year in the way that he was able to make more plays and be a little bit more poised in his game. So I could see maybe Geno Stone being that guy who continues to follow Denard Wilson, who I also don't think is going, despite leading the league in interceptions, I don't know if he's going to command like money like that because outside of the interceptions, you look at him and I think he still has a lot of room to grow in his game.
And I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you could make an argument for Geno Stone in Nashville. He had a career year under Denard Wilson. Anthony Levine, who's on the Titans staff, was a big mentor for him in Baltimore. He was a college teammate of Amani Hooker. Those are some things that were brought to my attention by @Matt Curry Sports on Twitter. So I appreciate you, Matt. That's, there are some compelling to be at the top of my list. That list we listed earlier of guys that are free agent safeties of note. He would be near the top of my list for guys they should target. And I think that would be a big addition for them. Can we real quick mention 2 guys? One, they're both linemen, both tackles, both left tackles. One of them is not quite yet unemployed by the Tennessee Titans and probably will be, we think. And the other one is not employed by the Tennessee Titans, but we've heard some news about him, some things in local radio in Nashville about him. And if you are looking for options in trades and options in free agency at the tackle position that were actually viable for like, maybe this is something that's not just a bridge, not just a stepping stone, not just a gap fill. Mekhi Becton is the name I'm alluding to. He is a tackle with the Jets. He is, I believe, he's not a free agent, right? I believe he's under contract. You check me on that. Maybe he is, and I'm messing that up. But regardless, we heard about him in local radio on Blaine and Mickey on 104.5 earlier this week, where it was said, quote, "The Titans are one of the teams that Becton's team told me was an option, and he's not going to cost a whole lot. If you can get him to playing like his rookie year, he's a good option on either the left or the right side," according to Tony Pauline on Blaine and Mickey's show. Tony is a consulting editor and NFL draft analyst, so he has been around the league for a while now and has good sourcing on that front. I don't hate that idea. I really do not, JT. It's all dependent on price. Like, I would say my cap for him is the contract they gave Andre Dillard last year, and that's the other guy I want to talk about. Andre Dillard, I think we alluded to it on Tuesday's show. Probably gone. Probably. But the odds of him being gone have decreased for me in the last month, the way that they talked about him at the Combine, talking about how you just don't find guys that have some of the traits that he has. You can't find them.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a guy that's gone, right? And so with a new O-line coach in Bill Callahan coming in, there may be some, I can fix him to this coaching staff. I'm not saying they're right, but I'm saying they're probably thinking about it.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's, until we see it, that's going to be a big thing as we go into every single day the next week until we get to free agency. It'll be interesting to see if a guy like Dillard is still on the team, because once again, you have the money, right? You have the money, I guess, but like, at what point do you say that money is okay to be still spent on a guy like Andre Dillard in finger cross mode, where you could just cut him and then find another option in like Mekhi Becton, who may have better traits, and just the injuries are what has really deterred his career. And so I think that
also playing for the New York Football Jets can't help you, right?
This is also true. But I think I don't see what would be stopping them from taking that mentality and saying, okay, see you later, Dillard. Let's take the guy who is just like you, and we're going to use the same kind of model as kind of trying to take a home run swing here, but maybe have a little bit better success and maybe have the better odds stacked in our favor.
And again, I am not saying it's likely that he is on the roster. I'm with you that if the money was equal, if it was a matter of you had a chunk of $10 million to spend, who am I giving it to? 100%. It's not Andre Dillard. But just to remind everybody, the contract situation with Dillard, he is owed $7-8 million this year by the Titans, whether he is employed by them or not. That's the guarantee for him. They can save $2 to $3 million by cutting him. And so that presents the question of like, okay, we're already giving him 7 or 8. Should we just spend the 2 or 3 more to have the body, to have the option to just throw him at Bill Callahan, say, here, fix this if you can. Like, it does not work. Might be fun to fix. Here you go. I don't think it's given the amount of money they have, right? Because if they were needing every cent, if they were the Buffalo Bills this offseason, I'd say get them out of here, be gone. But because they have some, you don't never have money to burn in the NFL, but they kind of have money to burn, right? Just throw a couple extra $1 million at that contract and just see what happens. I think maybe it's the sadist in me that's just won over, and I'm now full blown. Let's keep this, let's just see what happens. Keep him on the roster. No expectations whatsoever, but I need to see that fury. I need to feel the palpable fury from folks online when it happens. Because all these teams around the league the past couple of days have been cutting guys, letting them go. There was a massacre up on One Bill's Way yesterday, and everyone's like, why aren't the Titans cutting guys? And I'm telling them, well, because they don't really have guys to cut. Most of the team is a free agent anyways. And then people answer me back. They're like, they have Andre Dillard. And I'm like, that's fair. Fair point. They couldn't have cut him. But they haven't yet. Maybe they're waiting for a reason that I don't know. I'm just saying, might be fun to try.
You certainly are the cat, and the curiosity will come for you one way or the other. We'll have to wait and see. That is for sure.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, so those are the two lineman situations that I wanted to bring up. Let's talk about trades. Do you see any trades for splash? Now, you could always, send a 5th-round pick for a lineman here, things that are more 24-hour news cycle and then people forget situations. But big boy, full league news trades that are floating around. The idea of L'Jarius Sneed, cornerback for the Chiefs. T. Higgins, still a tag and trade candidate in the league, it seems. The Broncos are doing whatever the Broncos are doing, and it's the 3rd consecutive year of both of their top 2 receivers being on the trading block. Well, love hearing that same headline over and over and over, but this year I think it might actually be true. Do any of these guys strike you as, yeah, you could do that, you could pull that trade off, and I think that'd be fair for the Titans, or do they need to just stick with what they've got, spend the money they have, and not give up any capital?
The only one that I would really see happening is maybe a trade where you give up maybe a 6th and a pick swap in the 7th to go get a Jerry Jeudy or something like that, because I think that right now, with kind of, once, like you said, it's the 3rd year in a row and Jerry Jeudy's stock just continues to plummet, where I feel like he really doesn't have that much value anyways,
right?
For what is going on with that team. The other two, I think T. Higgins is going to be a Cincinnati Bengal next season. Now, would it make more sense for them to trade and take a guy like a Brian Thomas Jr. to bring in and kind of do kind of what the Titans did or tried to do? Maybe, but I still think that he's going to be a Bengal this next season. And then L'Jarius Sneed, I mean, we just saw the Jalen Johnson contract. Do you want to give up capital to sign a guy to maybe even more money than the Bears just gave to him? And
Right.
You're also giving up draft capital for one player that, like Randy said back when we had him on, is not going to make this team a championship caliber team. I just don't think in the realm of possibilities that makes a lot of sense for this team and where they are right now.
Right, and that Jalen Johnson deal done about an hour ago, reported by Bleacher Report, 4 years, $76 million, 54.4 guaranteed. So I agree with you. That's probably where you're starting with a hypothetical L'Jarius Sneed tag and trade situation. We've got some breaking news on the show, some Titans news. The Titans did their first thing in free agency. You want to guess? Have you seen this? Did you catch this yet? You want to guess who it's regarding? They re-signed a player that was already on the team.
I have no idea. It could be anybody.
Special teams king.
Ooh, Morgan Cox?
Morgan Cox is back on a 1-year deal for the Tennessee Titans. The snap king.
You know 37-year-old king.
Can't argue with that addition. He's been nails for 3-4 decades at this point. I've lost track. So good for Morgan Cox.
Now, you want to talk about a guy who moves the needle and makes this team a championship caliber.
Well, like Derek said right there, Titans Super Bowl champs with the greatest long snapper in the league. I will never forget when that guy at the Pro Bowl games won snap tack toe all by him, kick snap toe, whatever it was, by himself. That was a thing that more than just me watched, right? Okay, back to these trades, right? L'Jarius Sneed is the only guy in there that I think is worth considering for the Titans. If Courtland Sutton is available for less than I think he's going to be, the price that's being demanded for him, like if you can get a Courtland Sutton for a mid day 3 pick, sure, I'm about that. They may just end up cutting him too. Like you got to wait that out and see. I don't think the Broncos are done cutting some big boy names. It sounds like the reporting is indicating as much in Denver. But L'Jarius Sneed is one. I do love JT, by the way. You mentioned Sneed, you mentioned Higgins, you mentioned any of these guys, these high value guys. Everyone just assumes, well, it's 38, right? It's the 38th pick. That's what it gets it done. 38, 1-for-1. Like that seems to be everybody in their mind just thinks any player in the league can be acquired via the 38th overall pick. That being said, I think Sneed for the 38 is close-ish. It might take a little bit more than that. It might take a Sneed in one of your 7ths, a 38 in one of your 7ths for Sneed. I just don't think that's the area the Titans need to be sniffing in. If they feel it is super necessary for them, I'll tell you this, JT. If they were to do it, that would make me think very differently about how they're going to approach the draft with their non-first and second picks. Like, I'm confident they're not going corner with 1 or 2 if they make that trade. And I'd imagine they're going to, add, bring back a Sean Murphy-Bunting, add a mid to low level free agent cornerback, and just kind of try to build around a L'Jarius Sneed. But man, you got to be really confident in the guy if you pull that trigger.
I would agree with you there. Yep.
All right, what else to get to here? So let's look at some of the other guys in this cornerback market. We've had a couple of them come up recently. I think that there are some guys that are genuinely good options. If L'Jarius Sneed being tagged, if we're taking him off the board for the Titans and we're just looking at the guys that are truly going to be available next week for them to sign, and I'll pull up the full list here. I think that there are some guys that are worth pursuing, and I think that there's some fool's gold in here. The top of the group is a Kendall Fuller out of Washington. L'Jarius Sneed, technically out of Kansas City, is available, but not a full-blown free agent. Obviously, he's been tagged. Chidobe Awuzie out of Cincinnati. Stephon Gilmore in Dallas. Steven Nelson in Texas. Kenny Moore with Indianapolis. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, that's pretty much. And then you get to Sean Murphy-Bunting, essentially. So those are the top guys. Do any of these guys stick out to you as just, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole, and here's why?
I don't know if there's. I really don't think there really is a lot of guys that I wouldn't touch with the 10-foot pole. If there is one, like J.C. Jackson, like I would not go out and get him.
Yeah.
But on the other side of it, some of the guys that I really do like in this class that could be good fits. Chidobe Awuzie, like you said, has that Callahan connection. He's only 28 years old. Plays some pretty decent man, although he does tend to get targeted a lot, and that allows him to get beat. But I mean, the Titans have been lacking that guy on the outside who plays really good man coverage, press man a lot. You had Christian Fulton do it a lot, but at least Chidobe Awuzie was not failing more than he was,
Right.
So I think he could be a good fit as he continues to kind of get better. Another one I think that I really like, who also has a connection, Kendall Fuller from the Washington Commanders. He's 29, has that Chris Harris connection. He was 8th in the league for solo tackles last year with 65. I think he could be a really good option, who I think is a day one plug and play starter who has more upside than like the signing of Sean Murphy-Bunting last year. Those are two guys that I really like.
Yeah, Kendall Fuller's at the top of my list of guys that I want them to genuinely pursue. A part of it is the connections he has with the Titan staff, but like you said, on the right side of 30, his projected contract from PFF, 3 years, $13.3 million a year. So like a $40 million, $25 million guarantee contract. I feel like that is perfectly reasonable, and it's obviously well within the Titans' budget. I left out a couple of names. I knew this list I'm looking at was a little outdated. A couple of new names on the free agent market. Xavier Howard from the Dolphins was cut, and then Tre'Davious White with the Bills cut, 2 former Pro Bowl All-Pro talents. But former might be the operative word there. Those 2 are the ones that stick out to me as fool's gold in this group. I would also add Stephon Gilmore to that group for a different reason. I don't think Stephon is washed up necessarily, although towards the end of his run with Dallas last year, he started to get exposed a little bit. He plays a ton of man, like that's his game. He's going to be 34 this year, and it's just like the cliff has to be coming for him. So while his projected contract is just a 1-year, $10 million, $10 million guaranteed contract from PFF, and that's probably around the range he'll end up getting, I don't want to put all my eggs in that $10 million basket like that on a guy that you may be the one left holding the bag on him, so to speak, because he does finally just take that nosedive that we see DBs take from time to time. So Kendall Fuller is at the top of my list, and I'm with you that Chidobe Awuzie. How old is Chidobe on the right side of 30 as well?
He's 28.
28. So, but yeah, Chidobe Awuzie and not Ronald Darby, although Ronald Darby also on the list of potential guys. Kendall Fuller are the 2 that really stick out to me as ones that I'd like for them to target in that way. Let's talk about Calvin Ridley. Let's talk about the wide receiver group before we get out of here. And I know that you sent me an article from Reception Perception earlier this week that I found really fascinating. It's essentially making the case for why his season in Jacksonville last year wasn't as bad as folks think it was. What did you garner from that article? And are you in on Ridley getting a Christian Kirk-esque contract or more?
Yeah, well, I have to. What the article showed me is that there may be some more problems with who's throwing the ball than just Calvin Ridley. What Calvin Ridley
Are you
leads on.
joining our buddy Zach on the Trevor Lawrence's hashtag bad train
I'm
certified
not. I'm
mid
not saying he's bad, but I'm saying
mid
that I
mid
think
train?
that the criticism that Calvin Ridley got last year um, may not all be his fault, because I think when you
Hmm.
look at his success, when you look at the route percentage last season, it's a lot all over the place, and a lot of like what Calvin Ridley isn't really known for. Right, I think you saw a lot of his route percentage in a curl route. You had a lot in the 9 route, as well as
Hmm.
a bunch of comeback
Go
and
route,
out
right?
route.
Hmm.
Where go route, where you saw, despite that percentage, you saw in the success from the out route, corner route, go route, post dig, anything like that, where you're going upfield. All of his success in those positions right there were north of 70%, where his corner route was the lowest one at 73.3%. This is a guy on the post dig and out route was hitting on his routes over 80%, right?
Hmm.
So I think, which
And they just
brings
they
us
just weren't
to another
utilizing it. They
which
weren't
brings
going
us
that
to
way.
another conversation with, well, who was really the mastermind behind a lot of what Calvin Ridley was doing last year, and
Nick
Mr. Nick
Holtz.
Holtz. It
Hello.
brings up
Yeah.
some questions there with what he does. But with his game, I think that if there was a guy, despite him being 30,
Right.
and only he
Which
now has
still, I
another.
said it 3 shows in a row. How is this guy 30 years old? He's like 28 tops in my brain. I don't get it.
Now having another year under his belt, being back in football, it would be an interesting gamble to bring him in. However, I think that what a lot of what he does, DeAndre Hopkins also does and does better. So it'd be kind of like
Hmm.
bringing in a DeAndre
Redundant.
Hopkins light, when Brian Callahan said to us that they want to diversify their options and have kind of a little bit of each on this team. Now, that's not to say that Will Levis didn't have a lot of success throwing to DeAndre Hopkins. Now, could he do the same for Calvin Ridley? I think so, but this article really, for me, showed me that I think Calvin Ridley got a little bit too much hate. And maybe
Hmm.
a lot of the hate was, we drafted him super high in our fantasy football leagues and he wasn't performing. So,
Right. Right.
like something like
Yeah.
that. But when you look at the real football, I think depending on the contract, he may be worth it.
It's lame excuse making, but it may be a genuinely good reason. He was coming off of a year and a half of not playing football, right? There probably was some element of rust, and I'd imagine, barring age-related, injury-related setbacks, I'd imagine he probably plays at the same level, if not better, this upcoming season, just because he's getting back in the swing of things a little bit. And so if that's part of the equation here, for me, it's all about the money. And I think that most folks in the NFL are viewing this wide receiver group, now that we've got the tags out of the way, the long-term contracts out of the way, as, okay, it's Calvin Ridley and the rest of them, right? Like, I think that there is a pretty significant drop off, because then it's Calvin Ridley and you go into Darnell Mooney and Hollywood Brown and Curtis Samuel. Like that, it's really just not the same. And when that happens, it tends to just really, you can get into a hyperinflation situation with the value of that top guy, because everybody feels they need the top guy, or else you're getting a really, really poor second place. And for that reason, like, if I'm starting at the Christian Kirk contract, I'm okay with that number for him. I am. You're paying him to be a high end two. I mean, Christian Kirk was paid to be a 1, but because of the salary cap increase since then, that's really like high end wide receiver 2, 1B money. Cool. You're paying him to be that to DeAndre Hopkins. And if you end up paying him wide receiver 2-ish money, and he ends up being your 3 because you draft a Roma Dunze, or you draft a Malik Neighbors, or you draft a guy that is going to be a big part of your rotation, or DeAndre Hopkins is the 2 and you get bumped down, fine. Like that's an area where the Titans can afford to overpay. It brings me into this general idea, JT. And as I thought about this free agency group, this is where I came back to, like, trying to think about what is the Titans' primary goal this season. Is it to be as competitive as possible right away? Or is it something a little bit different, adjacent to that, but a little bit different? And I think it is different. I think it is, we need to take the big step needed to become competitive the next year. So in 2025, let's be all in then. But most importantly, we need to know definitively, based on this season, whether or not Will Levis is the guy. And in order for them to do that without a shadow of a doubt, I think they have to be really, really solid at worst, either on the receiving front or on the protection front. If he has real problems every other game with one or the other or both, all season long, there's going to be some shadow of a doubt in a lot of people's minds, and you're not going to know for sure. So if they need to overpay and have a DeAndre Hopkins, spend too much money on a 2-3 year deal for Calvin Ridley, and you don't quite ever get what you paid for in that way, and they go and draft a Roma Dunze, and they've got just bang, bang, bang. There's no excuses with your pass catching talent. We've got you dudes. I'm okay with that because it gives me the ability to say, yes, Will Levis is the guy, or it's time for them to look elsewhere.
Yeah, I think so. It really will be interesting to see, like you said, if they were to draft or sign a Calvin Ridley, would they still go back to that well and get the stalwart number one guy of the future, or kind of try to kill two birds with one stone and go with Calvin Ridley and maybe a smaller option like a Tyler Boyd, and then go left tackle and kind of try to kind of fill both needs. In that way, you have no questions asked. Let's see what Will Levis has got in the tank.
Before we get out of here, do we have some comments we should get to today, or are we
do have a lot of comments with a lot of people who have some thoughts today.
Let's hear 'em.
Alex Titan says either offensive line or DBs need overhauled before the draft. I would say that.
How are you overhauling O-line though? Like, are you bringing in Mike Onwenu from New England and just praying he can be a tackle, which I think is foolish? You're going and getting Mekhi Becton. Like, are there players available to you? Let me ask you this, JT. Are there players out there where money, no object, number of players added, no object, you're comfortable with the Titans offensive line going into the draft, having, like, we don't need a draft a lineman high. We're set if we get nobody.
I mean, could you make an argument that if you signed like Mitch Morse and then brought in a Mekhi Becton and then maybe brought in an Onwenu, like bring in all three guys?
That's and you just spend all your money
Yep.
on linemen that may or may not work.
I think that
that's
that
tough.
would be the only way to do it.
I guess you're right. I still don't like it. I'm unhappy if that happens, but I guess you're right. So fair enough.
Like, that's the only way that would happen, probably. I don't.
And you mentioned Mitch Morris. You mean as a center, correct?
Yes.
So we can keep going through questions here in a second, but I want to ask you: center is a position we kind of neglected here. I didn't list it at. I think a lot of people in our media market would list center as one of the positions the Titans need to address in free agency, and they certainly can. There's some guys out there that are available that you can do that with for sure. I'd be fine with them trying to address it in the draft because it's a really phenomenal group of centers in this draft, and they're going to come off the board later than the tackles. Like, there are going to be some decent center options for you late day 2, early day 3. And so if they go into the draft explicitly, like, we're going to get a guy, like, it's not on a if they're there list, it's on our to-do list, then I'm okay with that a little bit.
I think you have to address it one way or the other. You can't go back into the season with Aaron Brewer and Corey Levin and just try to figure it out again, right? I don't think, unlike having the raw athletic traits that an Andre Dillard has, Aaron Brewer and Corey Levin do not, which I think is the
raw unathletic traits.
Moving on here, Chef Rand says Darnell Mooney is my guy, who I think would be an interesting one to bring in. I think there has been talk that a lot of front offices are a lot higher on him than maybe the consensus media and common fan is.
I don't mind a Darnell Mooney. I mind an overpay of a Darnell Mooney. That's all.
And to that, Kenneth also says, is it telling when the only quality receiver to get is Calvin Ridley this go around? And I think if it's more telling of that's how the franchise tag works, and maybe not to get overly excited before all of that goes down in the offseason. I think that's maybe the way to look at it. Chef Ran also says Denard Wilson got to be bricked up looking at secondary options, saying also that he played safety too. That's low key his best position. So could be where Denard Wilson kind of bangs his fist on the table and says, that's where we need to go to get our guys.
Can we stop real quick on the receivers? Because I pulled up the projected contracts for both of those guys. Ridley, if this is the number, Titans should mail the check today. 3 years, $18.5 million APY, $55.5 million total, 32 and change guarantee. I'm cool with that, man. I'm fine with that contract for him. I just don't see it. I think he's going to get like $45, $50 million guaranteed by somebody because of that inflation of him being, like Kenneth said, the only value addition on the wide receiver market. With Darnell Mooney in contrast, his projection is 1 year, $9 million. If that's really the number, I'm really fine with that. A multi-year deal with like 13 guaranteed, I'm out on that idea. But if you can get a 1 year prove it flyer deal with Darnell Mooney, I've got no issue with that.
Yeah, and Derek says he's cool with Mooney as wide receiver 3, says he was extremely solid before DJ Moore got to Chicago. Think he could be good.
If you had a D-Hop, Rome Odunze, Darnell Mooney, you're feeling pretty good about your starting 3, right?
I think so. And Deagle says Christian Kirk has me believing Mooney or Hollywood could do well. I may just be delusional though.
Hollywood's just he's a fire. He's like a hand grenade from World War II. The pin's still in there, so you think it's safe to handle, but you want to be gentle with it because you may it could go off at any moment, and you probably should just not mess with it. That's me. Let's just not mess with him.
One more wide receiver that we just got some comments about back to back here. Sterkardis and Skarsky Conway say, would you even look at Michael Thomas? Which I think is
you almost made me go full Jinxie and just turn back in my chair.
Derek said $5 and a free meal at Hattie B's, then sure. I think that
I'll give him a Hattie B's gift card. We could make that happen. No, there's not. I think he's an active cancer on your locker room, and I think that I don't think he would ever see the field. So, I mean, what is he, like 33 years old? He's gone through a bajillion surgeries. Yeah, no, I'm out on that. What do you think do you think he's going to even land anywhere? Like, surely he goes somewhere, right?
I mean, it would be very cathartic if he went to like the Chiefs or something and they, try to do something with that.
Well, you're saying cathartic if he goes and is bad. I'd be afraid he'd go and just be like prime Mike again. He's 31 years old. So yeah, no, the answer is no.
Derek says, please bring Byard home. And Alex says CJ Gardner-Johnson makes a lot of sense. 2 guys who I think one could be brought back on a team friendly deal and another guy who you may have to pay a pretty penny, but I think would be worth it in the long haul there.
I get the impression Gardner-Johnson's going to be a Lion. I think that's I've heard that's kind of just a matter of time. That could change, but I wouldn't hold out too much hope for him to go somewhere else. With Byard, I know a lot of people have made fun of oh, now you want Byard back after you went and you saw he sucked with the Eagles. If you got him back on an appropriate deal for what he is at this point in his career, he can still play some football. I know you and I at the Combine were talking about this with Nick Suss. It's a possibility for him to still be of value to your team. It's just in a different role than what he was at his prime. You have to understand that. And that's going to come with a very, very different cap hit. It's going to come with a very different contract. So I'm not as high on him as I am with a Simmons out of Denver that was released today, who they're the same age, but Simmons seems to have a lot more gas left in the tank. Had a really, really nice year last year. But yeah, I don't mind just in general, that genre of lost a step veteran presence cornerbacks. I think they have a use for that guy.
And then finally, our last comment here, Derek also says they need to spend money this offseason. Scared money do not make money. And Alex says if Callahan can save Dillard, then I fully expect Bill is able to walk on water, which I would agree to.
That's a fact, I believe. If that's the rule. you're a celestial being. You are not of this world if you can do that. Okay, is that all we have today? Are we
That's
done?
all we have today. Yep.
Let's get to the weekend then, guys. We appreciate you all being with us. I'm going to go enjoy my spring break. JT, you go enjoy a Friday night or a Thursday night. Feels like a Friday night. Go enjoy a Thursday night and then go enjoy a Friday night. Have you 2 nights, my friend. We are the Hot Read Podcast. We'll be back next week. Well, not we. JT will be back next week on Tuesday doing a show like an hour or two, or actually, just kidding. One day, I keep thinking it's Monday. One day after the legal tampering period has begun, and one day before free agency fully begins. So you'll get a 24-hour last call free agency episode from JT. Have you even thought through what people should expect, or you're gonna decide that later?
I'm in the lab. I'm cooking.
All right, he's cooking. All right,
so.
Fair enough. So you're gonna have to just tune in to find out what JT's cooking for you. I'm looking forward to tuning in. You should as well. That's on Tuesday, and then Thursday, I'm guessing we'll have some free agency action to break down for you. So looking forward to all of that next week. Until then, for producer JT, I'm your host, Easton Freeze. Subscribe on YouTube. Follow us at Hot Read Pod on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. We'll talk to you next week.